go ahead and get some snacks and refreshments because I am so very excited to welcome you all to the third annual Black Women Breakthrough Summit. And now, yes, it is a very full schedule, very robust. So we're going to get to it. And I am so honored to share this platform with the speakers we have today and with all of you participating. So I hope y'all are ready to dive right in. And this keynote that we're about to already dive into needs no introduction, or there is no introduction I feel does her justice to prepare you for the tea that she is about to spill today. If you haven't been to past summits, you have already, if you have been to past summits, you have already heard how she has paved new ways in discussing anti-racist leadership, how she boldly presents and authors frameworks to dismantle the historical systems and policies that threaten our very existence and livelihoods in the organizations we work in and the societies that we live in. Or how she raises the bar in the boardrooms by day and cultivates community and sisterhood in her free time. I'm telling you, there is just no way I can get you ready other than to say, stay ready, because Dr. Rachelle Rogers is a force you want on your squad, and an advocate we all need to support our voices to be heard. So after these brief messages, the next voice you will hear is that of the Dr. Rachelle Rogers of Harvest Consulting. Thank you all again for joining us.
Good morning, everybody. I feel like after all of that, there's really nothing else I need to say. We can just move to the next thing. That was a lot. So between Shanice's introduction and a promo, wow, I'm a little overwhelmed this morning. So again, welcome. Thank you so much to Soul Movement Success for the invite. Thank you all for being here, and thanks so much for asking me to sort of share some of the things that I've learned. I tend to think of the work that I hold as sharing life experience, right? Lived experience along with a little bit of academic experience allows me to be able to have some things that I hopefully can share that will be meaningful. So I'm going to jump right in. I am going to move a little bit faster so that we can stay on time. We have a packed agenda today, and I just want to make sure that I honor that. So I'm going to share my screen and get right into it. Give me a moment to do all the things we have to do when we're sharing screens. Okay, so I have entitled this When Black Women Lead, Authentic Anti-Racist Leadership. And Shanice, the CEO, has called this a keynote, but I'd like to call it more of a conversation. So I encourage all of you to use the chat function. We are going to do a quick breakout in the middle of this so that you can really process some of the things that I'm hopeful or be meaningful to you. And so, yeah, let's jump right in. So a little bit of housekeeping. Again, place questions in the chat. The slides that I'm sharing are proprietary, so they will not be shared with you, but feel free to take screenshots, okay? Always starting whenever I am doing work anywhere, always starting acknowledging the land. So I acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of this land, paying respect to past and present elders. Where I'm sitting today is the homeland, traditional village sites, ancestral lands, and stolen territories of the Muwekma and Ohlone tribes. I recognize that white manifest destiny and colonization disrupted the work of these tribes. So I endeavor to advance racial equity and social justice in honor of the First Peoples. And let me just say parenthetically, that's the First Peoples here that are indigenous to this country. Obviously, we understand that African indigeneity was the beginning of civilization. So normally when I'm doing work, we're always talking about the land, the land, the land. And so a couple of years ago, I started thinking, well, what about Black women? So I wrote this Black female labor acknowledgement, and I certainly encourage all of you to start thinking about what labor acknowledgement you might want to write as you're in front of people. So here's mine. I recognize and acknowledge that the burden of environmental degradation and systemic injustice squarely falls upon the labor of Black bodies in the building of our country, our state, and our institutions. I remember that Black bodies were born and died working the land against their will for generations through the enslavement of our ancestors who were kidnapped and brought to this country from the African continent. I remember and acknowledge with sorrow the ways in which African women enslaved in this country were beaten, repeatedly raped, and forced to endure physical atrocities at the hands of white men and white women. Thus, I acknowledge that the U.S. chattel slavery system was perpetuated through the wombs of our female ancestors. I also remember and acknowledge the continued contribution of Black women's domestic labor over the centuries to today of voluntary, involuntary, traffic forced, and unpaid labor in taking care of other people's children. So, because of their work and because of their sacrifice, I commit to ensuring that the labor, spirit, resilience, and leadership of Black women is centered in my work and centered in my life. So if I were with you in person, I have an activity that I do where we spend some time acknowledging the labor of those who went before. But since we're virtual, if you could in the chat just put the name of someone whose labor you stand on their shoulders, right? Because of their labor, you are where you are. So I'm going to acknowledge Eddie Mae Eddings, who was my grandmother and used to clean the dorms at Cal Berkeley. I'm in Oakland at Cal Berkeley so that she could prepare for her family. I stand on the shoulders of her labor. And if a couple of you want to come off mute and acknowledge and just say the name of the person that you're putting in chat, that would be helpful as well.
Marie Frances Johnson.
Thank you. Okay. Listen, the necessity of acknowledging where we came from to get to where we are for me is part of my authentic leadership. And so you will hear me speak a lot about how do we get here, right? Who's responsible for how we got here, and specifically for us as Black women, continuing to acknowledge the labor of those who came before is extremely important in this work. So I just thank you for participating in that. Today, I'm going to do a little bit of content. I have 5 journal questions for you. So feel free to, I think I heard Shanice say, get your pens and papers together, or however you journal. And then we're going to do a couple of breakouts, meaning we're going to be in a couple of breakouts, and then we'll come back and do a whole group debrief. And also, these journal questions, I'll be here for the rest of the day. And so, if while I'm doing some breakouts, I'll be revisiting these journal questions in the breakouts. So, there's a through line there from this quick little talk into what we'll be doing for the rest of the day. And let's jump in. Journal prompt number 1. Who am I as a leader? Who am I as a leader? This notion of leadership is one that is complex. We understand that when I studied leadership as I was getting my doctorate, very few examples about Black female leadership, right? There is a standard of leadership that is extremely white male dominated. When we talk about the attributes and the things that we look for as leaders, it's always around white males, right? So I always encourage Black women, let's start to name and define who we are as a leader. So who we are and our racial context determines how we lead, right? We cannot divorce ourselves from our race nor our gender, right? That intersectionality is important as leaders. And so instead of maybe sometimes trying to downplay it, I think we should live into that, right? That this is who I am. And because I bring that, I'm bringing something special, right? And so because my leadership at its core is an extension of who I am, right? Again, your leadership at its core is an extension of who you are, right? It's your beliefs, your values, your self-awareness, and your willingness to extend to others. So when I bring that into the space, I'm bringing my uniqueness, right? I'm bringing all that I am. And when we silence part of who we are as leaders in an effort to get along or an effort to be more palatable, we are actually not allowing people to see the wonder that is inherent within all of us. So, journal prompt number 2 would be, what 3 values are demonstrated in your leadership? So, who are you? Number 1 is journal prompt number 1. Who am I as a leader? Exactly. Like I like to say, if I was in an elevator and somebody said, I will give you $500,000 if you can really tell me who you are as a leader in 5 words or less, right? So, understanding who you are as a leader is critically important. Then, what are your 3 values that are demonstrated in your leadership? And you could have others, but at the tip top of where you are, what are those 3 values that say, man, this is what makes me a leader for sure? And so I would like to offer for you a model that I've been working on that I'm writing about right now. I call it the 3 A's, but it's a Black female leadership model. And where I got this, I do a lot of work with Black women, specifically here in the Bay Area and in the Seattle area. And I'm on my 6th cohort of Black women leaders. And so as I look at the data from conversations, from the ways in which we have started to sort of narrow towards what does it mean to be a Black female leader, this has risen to the top, right? And so I would love to share with you really quickly the notion of leadership for Black females centered in these 3 areas that I call like the 3 A's, right? And so authenticity, anti-racism, and adaptability. Leadership for us, again, based upon my research, based upon the work that I've been doing with numerous Black women leaders in variety spaces, right? Not just, I mean, I am an educator, but not just in the educational space, but also they're from all different types of systems, right? So in county work, in a lot of them are in just business organizational work, right? So it's a variety of folks. What we have found is that Black women center on like these 3 pieces. And of course, none of us are a monolith, but there's some similarities. So I'm going to share that with you really, really quickly. So, as an authentic anti-racist, adaptable leader, you must either decide to harm the system or continue harming the people. It's your choice. When we decide, I am going to move in my authenticity, I am going to double down on my fight against racism, and that's going to require me to be adaptable. I've got to be able to move in a way that makes sense for me. The number one piece, what's the goal of all that, right? What's the goal of being the leader? What's the goal of being an authentic, anti-racist, adaptable leader? The goal is to harm the system. The goal is to say, as a result of what I'm doing as an authentic anti-racist leader, things were moving. I think of it like dominoes, right? There were dominoes that were happening. And then I came in as a leader and I shifted what has happened, what happens after me, right? As a result of my leadership, there has been change. And the change is to the system. And I want to pause here for a moment. We understand that the system is broken. And we understand that you may not be able to change the entire, like, the whole of the universe of the system, right? But I'm saying, as authentic, anti racist, adaptable leaders, as Black women, we're going into whatever space that we hold and we're shifting systems there to make it better for people and specifically to make it better for those who come after us. That's our number one goal. And it's really a choice because it's hard, because it's not easy. So let's delve into it. Authenticity. Brene Brown says authenticity is not something we have or don't have. It's a practice. It's a conscious choice of how we want to live. Authenticity is a collection of choices that we have to make every day. It's about the choice to show up, the choice to be real, the choice to be honest, and the choice to let our true selves be seen. And whenever I talk about this with Black women, a lot of Black women are like, I can't be real. If I'm real, I'm not going to have a job. I can't be, I can't, right? But I want to encourage us that when we silence ourselves, research indicates that there are numerous health challenges that occur. Am I saying that we should walk in tomorrow, Monday, and be like, yes, I'm about to let each one of y'all know how you're getting on my nerves? I am not suggesting that. I mean, there's a strategy for that, but I'm not suggesting that that's what authenticity is. But one of the ways that I try and manage my authenticity is having a high level of self-awareness. So I know when I'm triggered. I know when what happens in my body when, that person is tap dancing on that final nerve, and I know how to manage that so that I do keep the job, but also so that they are aware, right? And I have a lot of strategies that I use around that. I also understand that my high level of self-awareness creates an ability for me to be courageous in the ways in which I bring my authentic self to the space. It takes courage to stand to someone and say, Karen, I really appreciate, you coming to me to tell me what you thought about my presentation. But in this moment, not only is it not needed, but it's not necessary, right? It takes courage to do that because you don't know how folks are going to come at you, all those other different things. But what I have tried to do is create a space where this is who I am, period. And so I move from that as much as I possibly can. One last thing on authenticity. I have worked very, very hard to be the same person wherever I am. So if you see me at Costco, chances are I'm going to be the same person as I am speaking to you in this moment, as I am when I do other keynotes. I've worked really hard to sort of blend the professional, if you will, side of me with like the who I really am side. Now, of course, if you get me on a whisk table, there's going to be a different situation, right? But I'm still going to basically be like this, just using a different level of language, if you understand what I'm saying. But who I am does not change. And so this notion of code switching, I'm really not trying to do that anymore. This notion of I'm going to use my white voice when I'm on my phone, like the things that I sort of grew up with. And let me just say parenthetically, nothing is wrong with that because we got to do what we have to do to survive. But I grew up watching my mom speak to me one way and then the phone ring, and I could tell to whom she was speaking, depending upon how her voice sounded. And I've worked really hard to blend those. What I want to do is be myself wherever I am. And so I encourage all of you to think about how you bring your authenticity into the workplace. It requires self-awareness and it requires courage. So what I like to say is I'm bringing the wealth of who I am into any space. My culture, my beauty, my brilliance. I bring all of that when I walk into the door. So I don't shift so that you, and I should have said they, can feel comfortable with me. I show up so they can figure out what they need to change to be around me. I'm moving in who I am, right? So that for me takes me to journal prompt number 3. So journal prompt first was like, who am I as a leader? And then journal prompt number 2 was, what 3 values do I demonstrate in my leadership? And now journal prompt number 3 is, how do I demonstrate authenticity in my leadership? So I'm hoping that you are taking these journal prompts and writing them down. We don't have time really. If I was in person and we had a lot more time, I would give you time to write and talk, but we will do that in a moment. But I'm hoping that you'll hear something that resonates with you on these journal prompts. All right, so I just talked about authenticity as the first A, if you will, of this Black female leadership model. Let's talk about anti-racism. I think it's important to define anti-racism because I feel like people use it for a variety of different things, right? So, anti-racism is 2 things. It's the active, ongoing process of unlearning and relearning. As Black folks in this country, where we were kidnapped and where we have, since we got here, been demoralized, dehumanized, all of the things, it is really hard for us to think about unlearning some of the things that we've internalized as specifically as Black women, right? So if you think about Isabel Wilkerson's work around caste and how Black folks are at the bottom, Black women are at the bottom of the Black caste, right? And so trying to unlearn space, we were all excited when Auntie said, I'm going to take my time or I'm going to take my space, because we're not used to that. Trying to unlearn this notion that we have to shrink, trying to, like, all of those things are a result of institutionalized white supremacy. And so being able to actively work on unlearning and then relearning the way in which we need to move is step 1. And then it requires us to actively name whiteness, white supremacy, and white supremacy culture, even while working to disrupt those pieces. And I know that it is uncomfortable to do that, as my mom would say, in mixed company. But here's the thing, I need to name the thing that I'm working against, right? So Kendi talked about in his book that he had a cancer diagnosis and what it meant to work through that, and what that meant to him. When you name something, it gives you a container in which you can look at it and say, this is, oh, this is what this is. Racism is often really broad. I like to move it really close to like white supremacy or white supremacy culture, or, oh, that seems to be rooted in whiteness. Like I'm naming those pieces. Number 1, sometimes it invites more conversation, which is great because people are like, well, what do you mean by whiteness? And then number 2, it's, racism encompasses all of what happens against all races, right? And specifically for folks of color. When I'm talking, I want to name the one thing that is really hitting me. And whilst I often understand racism that happens between like Latinx Black people, Asian Black people, for me, because of systemic racism, I am continually trying to name and pinpoint the pieces around whiteness. So that's what's happening for me. And so I know what anti-racist leadership looks like, right? Here are 4 elements. Number 1, anti-racist leadership analyzes the role of racialized power, privilege, and oppression in our orgs. So when we are in a place of organizational structure, are we continually analyzing it? Which is more than being like, that sounds racist, right? It's really like naming those pieces to make them clear. And then we name and challenge white supremacy culture, white body supremacy, institution. Like, okay, we get that, right? We have to name that. It's imperative that we name what we're fighting against. And then anti-racist leadership uses knowledge and action to counteract the persistence and impact of racism across the organization. Once we analyze it, once we name it, then we use our knowledge, we use our action, we use whatever we have at our disposal to counteract that. And then finally, and this is a piece that when I'm working with Black women, they're all like, yes, I want to do that. Anti-racist leadership rejects notions of racial neutrality or racial innocence. And what that looks like is, oh, I didn't know. You knew. If you're over 5, right, you know what this is. And the way that what strategy we use to help you get over it might differ. But I reject racial neutrality. Neutrality is, oh, I'm a good person. I have one friend who's Black or whatever. I reject racial neutrality. I reject racial innocence. When you tell me you don't know, I tell you to stretch. You do know, you know something was happening. When you say, oh, I didn't mean it or I don't see it, I reject that as well. So that's what anti-racist leadership is. A lot more to break there, but I know that we're on a time limit. So journal prompt number 4. I would love you to think about in what ways you're uncomfortable about challenging racism at work. This is something we have to talk about as, within safe space, right? Without judgment. But what makes us uncomfortable? Do we not want to be called the angry Black woman? Do we not want to be accused of using the race card or playing the race card, right? All the things that people have said, to me, and also have said about folks who, all she does is talk about race, so people don't want to get along with her. Let's reframe that, right? So, journal prompt number 1 was, who am I as a leader? Number 2 was, what 3 values do I demonstrate in my leadership? Number 4 was this, I'm sorry, number 3 was this notion of who we are and within race. And number 4, oh my gosh, I'm talking too quickly. In what ways am I uncomfortable about challenging racism at work? All right. So I'm hitting this last A. The first one was authenticity. The second one was anti-racism. The third, adaptability. Adaptability means the ability to make small shifts, but staying who you truly are within your authenticity, right? And this is a piece where we need to take care of ourselves as Black women. So, what we want to do is figure out the difference. Some people are investments, some are bills. We must learn the difference. The reason that I put this here in terms of adaptability is you need to know to whom, like, are you paying a bill with this person or are you investing in them? Are you saying, yes, this is a utility person, this is a PG&E person? Because those things are transactional, right? If they're an investment, then that's a long-term piece. And this helps us understand how we move in our leadership. Do I need to invest in you or are you just going to be the PG&E bill? Right? We have to learn the difference. That's a strategy that allows us to maintain our own sense of wellness and our own sense of how we're moving forward. If we're walking around thinking everybody's an investment, everyone is not an investment, or your portfolio is too diverse, right? We need to figure out who's going to be an investment and who's going to be a bill. And the way that we do that is to make sure that our boundaries are in place. And boundaries is being aware of what is unacceptable, normalize saying no, do what's best for you, and know it's not your responsibility to sacrifice yourself for others, right? So the necessity of knowing who's an investment, knowing who's a bill, and putting our boundaries in place will give us the capacity to do this authentic anti-racism work, right? This is part of our adaptability. And when I work with Black women, they are always telling me, I don't have the space or the capacity to do things because I'm so worn out. And I take them right back to this slide and I'm like, okay, who's your investment, right? And who are your bills and where are your boundaries? So what we know from Forbes 2 years ago is compared to other women at their level, Black women leaders are more likely to have colleagues question their competence and to be subjected to demeaning behavior. 1 in 3 Black women leaders say they've been denied or passed over opportunities because of their personal characteristics, which includes their race and their gender. So if you know we're already coming with that when we walk into the workplace as leaders, it is imperative that we come with the strategies to combat that. If we know that folks are going to question our competence, in what ways are we going to move authentically so that we are like having a shield? I think of this as like my superpower shield. So when the darts come, because they will come, I'm not worn out by them because I'm prepared, right? So we're first class, but we keep walking back to economy, right? The longer we entertain what's not for us, the longer we postpone what is. We need to understand our worth. This is all part of the adaptability of being an authentic anti-racist leader. Here's the piece. Sometimes we stay too long where we should not be. And so the longer we entertain what isn't for us, the longer we postpone what's a possibility of what could be for us. So we need to understand what our worth is. That job may not be worth you, sis, or it is worth you, but you need to be in a different role. This is part of our adaptability, right? We have to figure these things out and take the time to understand where we are. Okay, I'm rushing. All right. So know your worth. Okay. So what I one last thing. Dear little me, you took on so much that wasn't yours to carry. We can set it down now whenever you're ready. Love me. When I work with Black women, I did some work with a group of Black women in Chicago, and I asked them what their dreams were. And one Black woman said, I ain't got time to dream. And I was saddened by that because we are taking on things that perhaps are not ours to carry anymore. They were when we picked them up, but we're still holding them. We're still carrying them. So, journal prompt number 5. What have you been holding that you can now put down? What have you been holding that you can now put down? All right, that's our female leadership model: authenticity, anti racism, adaptability, the 3 A's. I would love to go into breakouts right now. What's coming up for you around your leadership, given all that we've discussed? I want to do breakouts. So I think DTM is putting those breakouts together. I'm going to stop sharing. What's coming up for you?